In tonight's story, we delve into the chilling world of frequency 91.2, where a weary late-night radio host receives a desperate call from a child trapped in a house that burned down decades ago. Get ready to uncover haunting truths and buried secrets, as some echoes never truly fade. Chapter 1: Static Whispers. The rain was a constant companion in the city of Havenwood, especially after midnight. It drummed a monotonous rhythm against the grimy window of WZLM 91.2 FM, a small, independent radio station clinging to life on the outskirts of town like a forgotten promise. Inside, the air hummed with the faint, comforting thrum of old electronics, a scent of ozone and stale coffee clinging to the worn carpets, a perpetual aroma that had seeped into the very fabric of the building over decades. The station itself was a relic, its equipment a patchwork of vintage dials and flickering analog meters, a testament to a bygone era of radio where personality, not algorithms, ruled the airwaves. Every knob, every switch, felt imbued with the echoes of countless voices, countless nights. Ethan Thorne, a man whose face had seen too many late nights and too few genuine smiles, leaned back in his creaking chair, the worn leather groaning in protest beneath his weight. His reflection in the sound booth's thick glass was a shadowy silhouette, framed by the sickly green glow of the flickering neon sign of the station's logo outside, a beacon in the rain-slicked darkness. He was in his late 30s, early 40s, a landscape of cynicism etched around his eyes, a permanent weariness that seemed to have settled deep within his bones, a heavy coat he wore constantly. Yet, his voice, when it flowed through the microphone, was a surprisingly warm, resonant balm, a comforting presence in the lonely hours of the night, a voice that had become a lifeline for others, even if it offered little comfort to himself. "Good evening, night owls," Ethan murmured into the mic, his voice a low rumble, a familiar cadence that had soothed countless insomniacs over the years. "It's just past midnight, and if you're out there, staring at the ceiling, or maybe just watching the rain, know you're not alone. We've got some classic Miles Davis coming up, and then the lines are open. Let's talk about whatever's keeping you awake." He paused, letting the silence hang for a moment, a space for listeners to feel seen, to feel heard. His show, Night Owls, was more than just a broadcast. It was a sanctuary for the insomniacs, the lonely, and the lost. It was a quiet rebellion against the relentless, forced cheer of morning radio, a deliberate space where the shadows were acknowledged, not chased away. Ethan preferred it this way. The solitude suited him, a comfortable detachment from a world that had, in his experience, offered little but disappointment and the bitter taste of unfulfilled expectations. He had seen enough of life's cruelties, enough of human folly, to know that sometimes the safest place was on the periphery, observing, but never fully engaging. His own past was a landscape of muted colors, a place he rarely visited, preferring the gray, predictable present. He queued up. "Kind of blue." The trumpet notes mournful and smooth, filling the small booth, wrapping around him like a familiar blanket, a melancholic embrace. He adjusted the gain, the needle on the meter dancing rhythmically, a tiny, hypnotic ballet. He took a sip of lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, the bitter taste a welcome jolt, and stared out at the rain-streaked street, watching the blurred streaks of car headlights pass by, each one a fleeting glimpse of another life, another story. Nothing ever happened on these shifts. Just the music, the occasional rambling caller sharing mundane anxieties or profound loneliness, and the slow, inexorable creep of dawn, painting the sky in ever lighter shades of gray. It was a routine, predictable, and safe. A fortress against chaos, against the unpredictable terrors of the unknown. Then it happened. Mid-track, as the trumpet reached a particularly poignant note, a sharp, violent burst of static tore through the smooth jazz. It wasn't the usual gentle hiss of interference, the kind that might accompany a distant lightning strike or a faulty antenna. This was a violent crackle, a tearing sound, like dry leaves igniting in a sudden, furious blaze, a sound that grated on his nerves. Ethan frowned, annoyed. The old console was temperamental. prone to quirks and minor glitches, but this was unusual. This felt aggressive. He leaned forward, reaching for the dial, his fingers brushing the cold, worn metal, a faint electric tingle running up his arm. And then, through the cacophony, a sound. Faint, distorted, almost swallowed by the roaring static, but unmistakably a voice. A child's voice. "Help, please, help me!" Ethan froze, his hand hovering over the console, suspended in midair. His breath hitched, a sudden, sharp intake of cold air. He pulled back, listening intently, his cynical guard momentarily shattered, replaced by a primal sense of alarm. Was it a prank? Some kids messing around with a cheap voice changer, trying to get a rise out of the late-night host? He'd heard it all over the years. Drunken confessions, tearful goodbyes, even the occasional rambling conspiracy theory. But this was different. The raw, unadulterated fear in that tiny voice was too real, too raw, too profoundly unsettling to be dismissed as a joke. "Hello?" he said, his voice dropping slightly, a tremor he couldn't quite control. "Is anyone there? You're breaking up." He tried to project calm, but his heart was pounding. The static intensified, a roaring white noise that threatened to overwhelm the small voice, to drown it out completely, to erase its very existence. But it persisted, a desperate, reedy sound, thin as smoke, clinging to the airwaves, a fragile thread of sound in a sea of noise. "Trapped, in here, the fire." Ethan's brow furrowed, a cold dread beginning to coil in his stomach, spreading through him like ice. He hit the trace button, a reflex born of years in the booth, a desperate attempt to locate the source. But the line remained stubbornly blank. No incoming number, no origin. Just a phantom connection, a voice from nowhere, a signal from beyond the veil. He tried to speak again, to ask more questions, to demand answers, to offer reassurance, but the voice faded, swallowed by the static, which then abruptly cut out, leaving only the soft, melancholic notes of Miles Davis, now sounding impossibly distant and mournful, a requiem for something lost. He sat there for a long moment, the silence of the booth suddenly amplified, deafening, pressing in on him. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it, to rationalize it away. Fatigue. That's all it was. Too many late nights, too much coffee. His mind playing tricks, conjuring up ghosts from the ether, from the depths of his own weariness. He closed his eyes, rubbing his temples, trying to clear the image of a terrified child from his mind, to banish the haunting echo of her voice. He cleared his throat, forcing a professional tone back into his voice, a practiced mask of composure he had worn for years. "Apologies, night owls. Looks like we had a little technical hiccup there. Old equipment, you know how it is. Back to the music." He managed a strained chuckle, hoping it sounded convincing, hoping he sounded like the unflappable Ethan Thorne his listeners expected. He tried to sound casual, to project an air of nonchalance, but a prickle of profound unease had settled beneath his skin, a cold knot that tightened with every beat of his heart. He couldn't shake the distinct impression of a child's desperate plea. He'd heard enough desperate voices on the line over the years, enough raw emotion to recognize genuine fear, genuine suffering. This was different. This felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Like a violation of the natural order. He opened the phone lines again, half expecting the prankster to call back, gloating, reveling in the chaos they'd caused. Instead, the first caller was Martha, a sweet elderly woman who always called in to say she enjoyed the jazz and offer homespun wisdom, a comforting, familiar voice. "Ethan, dear, are you all right?" Martha's voice was raspy with age but kind, laced with genuine concern. "Sounded like quite a fright there." A child's voice it was. "Gave me a turn, it did. Reminded me of—" "Well, never mind. Just be careful, dear. Strange things happen after dark in Havenwood. Just a technical issue, Martha." Ethan lied smoothly, his voice betraying none of the turmoil within him. "Old wiring. Nothing to worry about." She hummed, unconvinced, a knowing quality in her voice that sent another shiver down his spine. sounded like a real cry for help. Poor thing. You hear all sorts on the radio, don't you? But that one felt real. Just be careful, dear. Havenwood has its secrets, and some of them don't like to stay buried. Her words, meant as a gentle warning, only deepened Ethan's unease, painting a picture of a town with a hidden, troubled past. Other calls followed. A trucker from out of state mentioned a weird vibe on the air, a sudden drop in temperature in his cab, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. A college student studying for finals thought it was a cool effect, a new, experimental sound design, completely missing the underlying horror. But no one offered a concrete explanation, and the phantom call didn't return that night. The silence after each call was almost as unsettling as the static itself, a void waiting to be filled. As the first sliver of gray light touched the horizon, bleeding through the rain clouds and painting the sky in muted hues of violet and gray, Ethan felt a lingering sense of profound unease. He packed up his things, the small, burned-out cigarette he'd forgotten in the ashtray a testament to his distraction, its acrid smell a faint counterpoint to the lingering phantom scent of smoke. He glanced back at the empty chair across from him in the booth, the one where guests occasionally sat, or where he sometimes imagined a silent companion. For a fleeting moment, he almost expected to see a small, translucent figure perched there, watching him, its eyes wide with unspoken terror, its small hands clutching phantom memories. He shook his head, a hollow laugh escaping his lips, a sound devoid of humor. He was definitely tired. Exhausted even. He locked up the station, the rain still falling, cold and relentless, mirroring the chill that had settled deep within him. The neon sign of WZLM flickered erratically, casting a sickly green glow on the wet pavement, an ominous beacon in the pre-dawn gloom. He got into his beat-up sedan, the engine groaning to life with a reluctant cough, a sound as weary as he felt. As he drove away, the tires splashing through puddles, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't just heard static. He'd heard a ghost. A lost, terrified soul. And it was calling to him, specifically. It was calling to Ethan Thorne, demanding to be heard, demanding justice. Chapter 2, Echoes on the Line. The next night, the rain had eased to a persistent drizzle, a fine mist that clung to the streetlights and blurred the edges of the city, softening the harsh lines of buildings into indistinct blurs. But the chill had deepened, seeping into the bones of Havenwood, a cold that felt older than the weather itself, a pervasive dampness that seemed to carry a hint of decay. Ethan sat in the sound booth, the familiar hum of the equipment doing little to soothe the knot of anticipation that had tightened in his stomach since his last shift. He tried to tell himself it was just another shift, another night of jazz and lonely voices, another predictable cycle. But the memory of the child's desperate plea from the previous night clung to him like a damp shroud, a constant, chilling presence that refused to dissipate, no matter how much he tried to rationalize it away. He started, "Night owls," as usual, his voice a practiced calm, a facade he was finding increasingly difficult to maintain. His usual detached professionalism was fraying at the edges, replaced by a nervous energy. He played the first set of music, his eyes darting to the console, to the phone lines, waiting with a morbid fascination, a desperate hope for answers. He felt a strange mix of dread and morbid curiosity, a powerful pull he couldn't resist. Part of him, the rational, jaded part, hoped it was a one-off, a bizarre fluke, a trick of the mind, anything to explain away the impossible. Another darker part, the part that had always been drawn to the unsettling corners of life, was already bracing for its return, a desperate need for answers overriding his fear, a need that felt almost primal. It wasn't long into the call-in segment when the static hit again. This time, it wasn't a sudden burst but a slow, creeping invasion, like a cold mist rolling into the booth, seeping through the walls, chilling the air. The lights above his console flickered violently, casting dancing shadows across the room, making the familiar space feel alien and menacing. The old reel-to-reel machine in the corner sputtered, its tape momentarily slowing, distorting the music into a warped, guttural groan, a sound like something in agony. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, a pressure that seemed to press down on him. And then, clearer than before, the voice. It was sharper, more defined, cutting through the crackle with an agonizing urgency, a desperate plea that resonated deep within him. "Hello? Can you hear me? Please." The voice was still young, perhaps 6 or 7, fragile and reedy, but the desperation had intensified, a raw, aching plea that twisted Ethan's gut, pulling at something deep within him, something long dormant. "It's cold, the fire, the house. I'm scared, so scared." Ethan leaned into the microphone, his voice hushed, almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile connection, would send the ghost fleeing. "I hear you. Who is this? Where are you? What's your name? Tell me your name. In here, the house, it's burning." The words were disjointed, fragmented, like a broken record stuck on a terrible loop, each repetition a fresh stab of terror. "Can't get out, smoke, they're coming for me, they locked the door." "Who's coming?" Ethan pressed, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet booth. He hit the trace button again, repeatedly, frantically, his fingers flying across the console, but the display remained stubbornly blank. "What house? Tell me where you are. I can help you. Just tell me where." "The Blackwood house, it's gone, but I'm still here." The voice was fading, becoming thin and reedy again, consumed by the rising static, a desperate whisper swallowed by a roar, a final, agonizing gasp. "They lied. It wasn't an accident. They lied about everything. About how it happened." Then silence. Abrupt, absolute. The static dissolved as quickly as it had arrived, leaving only the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the station, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just erupted. Ethan sat, his hands still poised over the console, his breath catching in his throat, his mind reeling, trying to process the impossible. Blackwood House. The name echoed in his head, a haunting refrain, a new piece of the puzzle. He'd never heard of it, not in any local history or news report he'd come across. It was as if it had been erased from existence. He tried to call the number back, though he knew it was futile. The line was dead, a mocking dial tone the only response. He checked the station records again, meticulously, tracing every wire, every connection, but there was no trace of an incoming call, no logged number, no digital footprint. It was as if the voice had materialized from the air itself, a phantom signal from a forgotten past, a desperate plea from beyond the grave. Frank, his station manager, poked his head into the booth, a half-eaten donut in his hand, his expression a mix of annoyance and concern, his brow furrowed with worry. "Everything all right, Thorne? Sounded like a short circuit in here. Lights flickering like a disco. You're gonna blow a fuse, and then we'll really be off the air." Ethan looked at him, his expression grim, his eyes wide with a desperate urgency that Frank clearly didn't understand. "Frank, something's happening. I'm getting calls. From a kid. And they're talking about a fire, a house called Blackwood Manor, saying it wasn't an accident. It's real, Frank. I swear to God, it's real. I can smell the smoke." Frank scoffed, wiping powdered sugar from his chin, his skepticism a thick, impenetrable wall. "Kid's probably got a cheap voice changer app, Thorne. Or maybe you're just working too many late nights. You're starting to spook yourself. And frankly, you're starting to spook the listeners. We need everyone we can get, especially with the ratings as they are. This isn't good for business." He walked away, muttering about faulty wiring and the need for a station overhaul, completely oblivious to the true nature of the problem. Ethan ignored him, the words barely registering. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen, a desperate blur of motion. Local fires 30 years ago, Havenwood, Blackwood Manor. He scrolled through news archives, historical society records, old community forums, anything that might shed light on the name. Nothing immediately jumped out. No prominent Blackwood Manor fire in any official capacity. It was like the name didn't exist in the official records, as if it had been scrubbed clean from history, a deliberate act of erasure. He felt a growing, unsettling compulsion, a powerful, undeniable pull that transcended logic. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a desperate, aching need, a profound sense of responsibility. The child's voice, so desperate, so real, had burrowed under his skin, into his very soul. They lied. It wasn't an accident. The words echoed in his mind, a haunting refrain that demanded answers, demanded justice. As he sat there, a subtle, yet profound, change occurred in the booth. The air, already cool from the persistent drizzle, seemed to drop several degrees, a sudden, localized chill that made the hairs on his arms stand on end, raising goosebumps along his flesh. Then, faint but distinct, he caught the smell of smoke. Not acrid, burning wood, but something older, colder, like the ghost of a long-extinguished fire, a phantom scent clinging to the air, a memory of ash and destruction. He sniffed, turning his head, searching for the source, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the lingering cold. He told himself it was the old building, the dampness, his imagination playing tricks, but a cold, undeniable certainty was forming in his mind. He glanced at his monitor, the glowing text of his research a blurry mess. For a split second, the screen seemed to distort, pixels shifting and swirling, and in the fleeting chaos, he thought he saw it, a child's face, pale and indistinct, superimposed over the glowing text, its eyes wide with a silent plea, its mouth open in a soundless scream. It was gone before he could truly register it, leaving him blinking, wondering if he was finally losing his mind, if the stress of the late nights was finally breaking him, pushing him over the edge of sanity. He knew then. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a technical glitch. This was something else entirely. Something that had been waiting, trapped, for someone to finally listen. A soul in torment. And somehow, that someone was him. He had to find out what happened to the Blackwood house. And the child. He had to. There was no turning back. Chapter 3: The Ashen Address. The next night, Ethan didn't wait for the call. He had a map of Havenwood spread across his desk, old and brittle, its creases worn white like ancient scars, a testament to decades of use. He'd spent the entire day poring over historical society records, cross-referencing property deeds, forgotten land surveys, and even old census data from the Havenwood archives. The name, Blackwood Manor, wasn't on any modern map, a deliberate erasure, a forgotten landmark, but the old ones, tucked away in dusty archives, showed a sprawling estate on the western edge of town, nestled deep within a tangle of forgotten roads and dense, ancient woods. Its last recorded owner, the prominent Blackwood family, a name that had once commanded respect and influence in Havenwood. Its last recorded status: destroyed by fire, October 27, 30 years ago. The date, chillingly precise, sent a fresh shiver down his spine. The child had mentioned October 27th. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a terrifying mosaic, a picture of a tragedy deliberately concealed. He was on air, playing a particularly mournful blues track, the kind that spoke of loss and longing, of lives cut short, when the static returned. This time, it felt less like interference, and more like a palpable presence, a cold breath on the back of his neck, a silent observer in the booth, its unseen eyes fixed on him. "Please hurry." Lily's voice was weak, strained, as if she were running out of time, her energy fading, her words barely audible above the rising crackle. "The address? 17. Blackwood Lane, under the old oak. Find me, before he comes back." Ethan scribbled furiously, his pen scratching against the paper, leaving deep indentations, his hand shaking with urgency. 17 Blackwood Lane. "I'm coming. I'll find you. Just hold on. Don't go anywhere." The voice faded, but a new, chilling sound emerged through the dying static, a faint, mournful wail, like whined through broken glass, followed by a child's heart-wrenching sob, a sound of pure despair. Then, absolute silence, more profound than any static, a void that swallowed all sound. He barely finished his shift, his mind already miles away, racing towards the ruins, consumed by a desperate need to act. The moment he was off air, he grabbed his old, worn trench coat, its fabric heavy with the scent of damp wool, his car keys, and the precious map. The rain had picked up again, a steady, drumming downpour that matched the frantic beat of his heart, a relentless rhythm against the windshield, blurring the road ahead. He drove out of town, the familiar streetlights giving way to the oppressive darkness of the countryside, the distant glow of the city fading behind him. The road to Blackwood Lane was barely more than a muddy track, overgrown with tenacious weeds and shadowed by ancient, gnarled trees that clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers, their branches dripping with rain. His headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating fleeting glimpses of twisted roots, stagnant puddles, and the occasional glint of unseen eyes in the undergrowth. He found it eventually, a break in the trees, a rusted, twisted gate hanging precariously from one hinge, half swallowed by thorny bushes, a silent sentinel guarding a forgotten tragedy. Beyond it, a long, winding driveway, choked with weeds and fallen leaves, led to a clearing that felt unnaturally silent, eerily still, as if holding its breath. The rain was relentless as he stepped out of the car, the cold seeping into his bones, chilling him to the marrow, a dampness that seemed to penetrate his very soul. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and acrid, like old ash, a smell that seemed to cling to his clothes and hair, a phantom scent of destruction. There, in the center of the clearing, stood the ruins of Blackwood Manor. It was the skeletal remains of a once grand house, a stark testament to a violent, consuming fire. Charred timbers jutted towards the sky like broken bones, black against the gray sky, silhouetted against the stormy clouds. Stone walls, blackened and crumbling, stood as silent sentinels, their surfaces slick with rain, weeping tears of despair. The roof was long gone, leaving gaping holes that stared up at the stormy sky like vacant, unseeing eyes, windows to a forgotten horror. A profound desolation hung over the place, a silence so deep it felt like a scream, a vacuum where life once thrived, now replaced by an unbearable emptiness. Ethan walked slowly, his boots sinking into the muddy ground, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, dripping down his face, mingling with what might have been tears. He felt a profound sense of wrongness, a lingering echo of pain and terror that permeated the very ground beneath his feet, a palpable sense of suffering. He knelt, his fingers brushing against the cold, damp earth, sifting through the debris, searching for any sign, any clue. He saw fragments of what once was a broken porcelain doll's head, its painted eyes staring blankly at the sky, a silent witness to tragedy, a small, burned toy soldier, its plastic melted into a grotesque, unrecognizable shape, a childhood toy twisted by fire. He picked up the doll's head, its coldness seeping into his palm, a tangible piece of the haunting, a chilling connection to Lily. As he stood, a figure emerged from the tree line, seemingly materializing from the shadows. An elderly man, his face weathered like old leather, deeply lined, his eyes sharp and suspicious, like those of a wary predator, fixed on Ethan. He carried a shotgun loosely in his hand, a silent, unmistakable warning, its glint a stark contrast to the gray landscape. "Lost, mister?" The man grunted, his voice raspy, gravelly, a sound of worn-out patience. "This ain't no place for sightseers. Especially not after dark. Folks around here don't take kindly to strangers poking around. I'm Ethan Thorne," he began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands, a forced calm. "From WZLM. I'm looking into the Blackwood fire. The one from 30 years ago. I've been getting some unusual calls." The old man's eyes narrowed, hardening like flint, his gaze unwavering. "Ain't nothing to look into. Tragic accident. 30 years ago. Fire took everything. Best left buried. For everyone's sake." He gestured with the shotgun, a subtle but firm movement, emphasizing his words. "You best be going. Some things, they don't like being disturbed. And this place, it's got a long memory. A long, dark memory." Ethan tried to press him, to ask about the family, about Silas Thorne, about any survivors, but the man was unyielding, his gaze hard and unwavering, his mouth set in a grim line. I said, "Best be going. There's nothing for you here but trouble. And maybe worse." As Ethan turned to leave, a profound sense of unease washing over him, he noticed another figure, a woman, watching him from the porch of a dilapidated farmhouse further down the lane. Her face was pale, drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and warning, like a deer caught in headlights, paralyzed by terror. She quickly retreated inside, pulling the curtain shut with a nervous jerk, as if his presence was a contagion, a harbinger of ill fortune. Back in his car, the chill wasn't just from the rain. It was a pervasive cold that had nothing to do with the weather, a cold that seemed to emanate from the very ground, from the ruins themselves. He felt a growing sense of being watched, an unnerving prickle on the back of his neck, as if unseen eyes were following his every move, judging him. He glanced in his rearview mirror, but saw only the skeletal remains of the manor, shrouded in rain and shadow, a silent, accusing presence, a tombstone for a forgotten crime. He found a faded, almost illegible memorial plaque near the overgrown driveway, half hidden by weeds, dedicated to the Blackwood family, lost to the flames. He also spotted a small, child-sized shoe, half buried in the mud near a crumbling stone wall. It was a tiny, leather shoe, burnt and warped, but unmistakably a child's. He left it there, a silent, heartbreaking testament to the tragedy, a promise to Lily. The town, he realized, wasn't just silent about the fire. It was actively afraid. Afraid of the past, afraid of the truth, afraid of what might happen if the secrets were unearthed, if the ghosts were disturbed. And Ethan, for the first time in a long time, felt a tremor of genuine fear himself. But beneath it, a stubborn resolve hardened, a fierce determination. He had to know what happened here. For Lily. For the child whose voice haunted his nights and whose spirit clung to the ashes of her home, demanding justice. He was now inextricably linked to this tragedy. Chapter 4: Rain and Remnants. The rain became Ethan's constant companion, a ceaseless drumming against his apartment window, a mournful soundtrack to his growing obsession. Sleep was a luxury he could no longer afford, replaced by restless hours poring over old archives. The Havenwood Public Library, with its musty smell of aging paper and forgotten stories, its quiet, echoing halls, became his second home, a sanctuary of dusty knowledge. He spent his days hunched over microfiche readers, the flickering light casting ghostly shadows on his face, or sifting through brittle newspaper clippings, their ink fading like old memories, each page a whisper from the past. He started with the official reports of the Blackwood Manor fire. The local newspaper, the Havenwood Chronicle, had covered it extensively at the time, their headlines screaming, "Tragedy strikes prominent Blackwood family," detailing the swift, devastating blaze on October 27th, 30 years ago. The reports concluded it was an accidental fire, likely due to faulty wiring or a forgotten candle. The narrative was neat, tidy, and conclusive, designed to provide immediate closure. But as Ethan delved deeper, inconsistencies began to surface, like weeds pushing through cracked pavement, stubbornly refusing to be ignored. Witness testimonies were vague, often contradicting each other on minor details. The exact time the fire started, the color of the smoke, who was seen leaving the property, the number of people present. A police report, buried deep in the archives, mentioned a rapid and unusual spread of the fire, noting its intensity and the speed with which it consumed the manor, but dismissed it as a quirk of the old timber structure, an unfortunate characteristic of historical architecture. Pages were conspicuously missing from the fire marshal's initial investigation, marked simply, "Irrelevant," a bureaucratic shrug that now felt like a deliberate act of concealment, a purposeful redaction. The case had been closed with remarkable speed, almost as if the town, or someone within it, was eager to bury it, to sweep the ashes under the rug and forget the horror. He found old photographs of the Blackwood family, tucked away in dusty yearbooks and forgotten society magazines, glimpses into a life that was brutally cut short. Elias Blackwood, the patriarch, a stern-faced man with piercing eyes that seemed to hold a hint of unease, a successful industrialist who had built his fortune in textiles, his empire seemingly unshakable. His wife, Eleanor, elegant and beautiful, but with a haunted, fragile look in her eyes even in the sepia-toned images, a sadness that seemed to precede the tragedy, a premonition of doom. And their 2 children. A handsome, athletic boy named Thomas, about 15, with a confident, almost arrogant smirk, and a younger girl, no older than 7, with bright, curious eyes and a shy, almost ethereal smile. Lily. Her face, even in the faded print, was unmistakably the face he'd glimpsed on his monitor, the face of the voice that haunted his nights, a face now etched into his memory. He began to piece together their history, a narrative of ambition, wealth, and quiet desperation. The Blackwoods were wealthy, influential, pillars of the community, their names synonymous with prosperity and power. But whispers in the old society columns, veiled references in gossip rags, hinted at cracks beneath the polished surface, a rot beneath the veneer of respectability. Elias's business ventures were reportedly struggling in the years leading up to the fire, burdened by bad investments, a changing market, and a series of questionable deals that bordered on the illicit. Eleanor was rumored to be increasingly withdrawn, suffering from delicate nerves, her public appearances becoming rarer, her once vibrant spirit dimming. And there were veiled, almost coded references to a family dispute, involving a distant cousin, Silas Thorne, no relation to Ethan, he noted with a grim irony, though the shared surnames sent a prickle of unease, who had a long-standing, bitter grudge over an inheritance, a long-forgotten will that had bypassed him, leaving him with nothing. The betrayal and loss Lily had hinted at began to take shape, a dark tapestry woven with threads of greed, desperation, and familial discord. Was it Silas, driven by financial desperation and a thirst for what he believed was rightfully his, a man consumed by envy? Or something more intimate, more devastating, within the family itself? A desperate act to escape financial ruin, a last resort to save face? A hidden affair, a secret that threatened to unravel their perfect facade, a scandal too great to bear? The possibilities were endless, each one more chilling than the last, each one a potential motive for murder. As Ethan's investigation deepened, so did the haunting. Back at the station, the subtle shifts became more pronounced, more insistent, no longer easily dismissed. He'd leave his coffee cup on the console, only to find it move to the edge of the desk when he turned his back, as if an unseen hand had nudged it, a playful yet terrifying act. The faint sound of a child's laughter, light and airy, would echo in the empty hallways, a sound that was both innocent and deeply unsettling, or a soft, mournful crying would seem to emanate from the walls themselves, a sound that chilled him to the bone, a lament for a life cut short. The shadowy figures he'd glimpsed in his periphery began to linger, to coalesce, to take on more distinct forms. They were still indistinct, like smudges in the corner of his eye, but they were undeniably present, growing bolder, their presence more forceful. He'd catch a glimpse of a small, child-sized shadow darting between the rows of old reel-to-reel machines, or standing silently behind the glass of the sound booth, just out of focus, its form wavering like heat haze, a distortion in the air. He'd spin around, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat, only to find nothing but the empty air, the faint scent of old ash clinging to the silence, a constant reminder of the tragedy. His dreams, once a merciful blankness, a respite from the day's anxieties, became vivid, terrifying nightmares. He was no longer just hearing Lily's screams, he was in the fire with her, experiencing the horror firsthand, feeling the heat, the terror, the pain. He felt the suffocating heat, the choking smoke burning his lungs, saw the orange glow through the cracks in the floorboards, the hungry flames licking at the walls, consuming everything in their path. He saw Lily's terrified face, her small hand reaching out, pleading, desperate for rescue, and sometimes he saw himself in the dream, paralyzed, unable to help her, a silent witness to her final, agonizing moments, reliving his own past failures. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, disoriented, the phantom smell of smoke clinging to his nostrils, the screams echoing in his ears, a symphony of terror that refused to fade, even in the light of day. The lines between memory and reality, between his waking life and his haunted dreams, began to blur, to intertwine into a single, terrifying tapestry. He was no longer just investigating a cold case. He was living it, reliving Lily's last moments, experiencing her terror, becoming a part of her tragedy. And the chilling truth was, he was starting to believe he wasn't alone in his apartment, or in the radio station, or even in his own mind. Lily was with him, a constant, spectral presence, guiding him, pulling him deeper into the ashes of her past, demanding justice, demanding to be heard. Chapter 5: Ghosts in the Static. The static was no longer just interference. It was a language. A broken, fragmented language, but a language nonetheless, one that Ethan, fueled by endless cups of stale coffee and a desperate, burning need for answers, began to understand. The radio calls, once simple pleas, now contained a terrifying narrative, intermingled with Lily's increasingly frantic cries, each word a desperate attempt to convey a truth long buried, a secret screaming to be unearthed. Eleanor, she knew. Lily's voice, thin as spun glass, fragile yet insistent, would whisper through the crackle, barely audible above the rising hum of the airwaves. Mr. Silas, the papers. October 27th, the party. He knows, don't trust the quiet ones. It wasn't the fire that killed me, it was him. He locked the door. Ethan scribbled everything down, his notebooks filling with frantic scrawl, names, dates, cryptic warnings, each piece a fragment of a larger, more horrifying puzzle. His hand ached, but he couldn't stop. Eleanor was Lily's mother, a woman whose haunted eyes in the old photographs now held a new, tragic meaning, a silent testament to a hidden burden. Mr. Silas had to be Silas Thorne, the distant cousin he'd read about, the one with the long-standing inheritance grudge, a man whose shadow seemed to stretch across decades, reaching into the present. The papers. Financial documents? A will? Something that held the key to the Blackwood family's ruin, a motive for murder. The party. On October 27th, the night of the fire, was a detail he'd initially dismissed as irrelevant in his initial research, a mere social event. Now, it felt crucial, a deliberate cover for a heinous act, a gathering that turned into a funeral pyre. He dug deeper into the lives of Eleanor Blackwood and Silas Thorne. He found old society pages detailing Eleanor's increasing reclusiveness, her delicate nerves, often attributed to her husband's failing business, a convenient excuse to hide a deeper sorrow. But a small, almost overlooked article, buried deep in the archives, mentioned her quiet, almost secretive, visits to a local lawyer in the months before the fire, hinting at a desperate attempt to protect her children, or perhaps herself, from a looming threat. And Silas Thorne, while publicly mourning the loss of his dear cousins, had quickly and quietly acquired several of Elias Blackwood's smaller, less profitable assets in the aftermath of the fire. A series of transactions that now reeked of calculated opportunism, a vulture picking at the bones of a tragedy. He was a man who moved in the shadows, always present but rarely seen, a master of manipulation, a spider spinning a web of deceit. The quiet ones, indeed, were often the most dangerous. The static itself seemed to form patterns, almost like a visual language, a spectral Morse code that only Ethan could interpret. When Lily was trying to convey urgency, it would pulse and surge, a frantic heartbeat on the airwaves, a desperate plea for him to hurry. When she was recalling a painful memory, it would soften, almost like a sigh, a wistful echo of a life cut short, a moment of profound sadness. Ethan found himself staring at the sound waves on his console, trying to decipher the visual cues, convinced that Lily was trying to show him as well as tell him, to bridge the gap between their worlds, to paint a picture of her final moments. The mental strain was immense. Ethan's sleep deprivation was chronic, his eyes perpetually shadowed, bruised purple beneath them, his skin pale and drawn, almost translucent. He became irritable, snapping at Frank, who was now openly concerned, his gruff exterior softening with genuine worry. "Thorne, you look like death warmed over," Frank had said, hands on his hips, his voice laced with exasperation. "You need a break. A vacation. Go somewhere without a radio, without a single frequency in sight. You're going to burn yourself out." Ethan just shook his head, a weary, almost imperceptible movement. "I can't, Frank. Not yet. There's something I have to finish. Something I have to understand." He found himself talking to Lily's voice even when he wasn't on air, whispering questions into the empty booth, coaxing her, pleading with her for more details, for a clearer picture of the horror she had witnessed. He knew it sounded insane. He felt insane. He'd catch himself mid-sentence, his voice echoing in the silence, and wonder if he was finally losing his grip on reality, if the constant exposure to the supernatural was finally breaking his mind, pushing him into a realm from which there was no return. The ghost's influence extended beyond the station, seeping into every corner of his life, tainting every moment. His apartment, once a sanctuary of mundane normalcy, began to feel haunted, its familiar comforts replaced by an unsettling chill. Lights flickered erratically, especially when he was deep in thought about the case, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock his sanity, twisting familiar objects into monstrous shapes. He'd feel a cold breath on his neck, a phantom touch, only to spin around and find nothing, just the empty air, the lingering scent of old ash. One morning, he found a small, antique silver locket, tarnished and empty, on his bedside table. He'd never seen it before. It felt cold to the touch, and for a moment, he swore he heard a faint, childish giggle, a sound that was both innocent and deeply disturbing, a reminder of the life that had been stolen. The cryptic warnings from Lily were becoming more specific, more urgent. "He knows, he's watching, you're in danger, he'll stop you." Ethan felt a growing paranoia, a constant prickle of unease that never left him. Was it just the ghost's influence, or was someone else aware of his digging? Someone who had a vested interest in keeping the past buried, someone who would stop at nothing to protect their secret, even murder? He started checking his locks twice, triple-checking them, looking over his shoulder on the deserted streets, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone, ready to dial for help, though he wasn't sure who he would call, or if anyone would believe him. The line between Lily's spectral world and his own waking nightmare was blurring, intertwining into a single, terrifying reality, and Ethan was rapidly losing his way, becoming consumed by the darkness. He was no longer just an investigator. He was a target, and the hunter was becoming the hunted, caught in a web of deceit and spectral vengeance. Chapter 6. Signal lost. The supernatural occurrences escalated from unsettling to overtly aggressive, a relentless assault on Ethan's already frayed nerves, pushing him closer to the brink. Lily's presence was no longer just a whisper in the static. It was a palpable force, pushing against the boundaries of Ethan's reality, demanding to be heard, to be seen, to be acknowledged. The radio signals, once merely flickering, now cut out entirely at crucial moments, plunging the broadcast into dead air with a jarring abruptness. If Ethan was discussing a specific detail from his research on air, or if he was close to deciphering a particularly cryptic message from Lily, the broadcast would abruptly cease, a chilling affirmation that something was actively trying to silence him, to prevent the truth from emerging, to keep the secrets buried. The silence was more terrifying than any static, a vacuum that swallowed sound and light, leaving only the drumming of his own frantic heartbeat. Frank, the station manager, was beside himself, convinced the station was falling apart, muttering about imminent bankruptcy and the need for a complete overhaul. "It's the old wiring, Thorne. I told you we needed an upgrade. This place is falling apart." He'd bellow, oblivious to the true, spectral cause of the malfunctions, attributing it all to faulty equipment. The shadowy figures were no longer fleeting glimpses, indistinct smudges in the periphery of his vision. They lingered, taking on more defined, though still indistinct, human-like forms, their outlines shimmering like heat haze. He'd catch a glimpse of a small, child-sized shadow darting through the studio, a fleeting outline of a small hand reaching out, almost touching him, a silent plea. One night, as he sat hunched over his notes, illuminated only by the glow of his monitor, he saw a tall, imposing shadow, vaguely male, standing directly behind Lily's translucent form, a silent, menacing presence that radiated pure malevolence, a cold, oppressive weight. Its form seemed to ripple, to coalesce into something darker, more substantial, a looming threat. A shiver of pure dread, cold and primal, ran down his spine. He spun around, heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat, but the shadows would melt back into the darkness, leaving only a lingering chill and the phantom scent of old ash. His dreams had become a relentless torment, a cruel, vivid theater of horror from which there was no escape. They were no longer just nightmares. They were terrifying replays of the fire, seen through Lily's eyes, experienced through her senses, making him a reluctant participant in her final moments. He felt the agonizing, searing heat, the suffocating smoke burning his lungs, choking him, making him gasp for air even in his sleep. He saw the orange glow through the cracks in the floorboards, the hungry flames licking at the walls, consuming everything in their path, devouring the world. He felt the terror of being trapped, the desperate attempts to open a locked door, to escape the inferno, the futile struggle against an unstoppable force. And sometimes he saw the face. A distorted, shadowed face, but undeniably human, filled with a cold, ruthless determination, a face that haunted his waking hours, a visage of pure evil. He would wake up screaming, drenched in cold sweat, disoriented, the phantom smell of smoke burning his nostrils, the screams of a child echoing in his ears long after silence returned, refusing to fade, clinging to him like a shroud. Physical manifestations became more frequent and unsettling, invading his personal space, blurring the lines between the spectral and the real. Objects were moved or hidden in plain sight, defying logic. He'd find his car keys in the refrigerator, his coffee mug in a desk drawer, his research notes scattered across the floor, as if an unseen hand was playing a cruel game. One morning, a small, burnt wooden button, the kind from a child's coat, appeared on his pillow, placed there with deliberate intent, a chilling memento. He knew it wasn't his. It was a tangible piece of Lily's tragedy, a chilling reminder of her lingering presence, a silent accusation. He heard distinct footsteps echoing in the empty hallways of the station, whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, or even faint, mournful cries when he was alone, checking the equipment, a symphony of unseen suffering that only he could hear. Ethan's health deteriorated rapidly, his body mirroring the chaos of his mind. Dark circles perpetually bruised the skin beneath his eyes, giving him the appearance of a haunted man, a wraith. He'd lost significant weight, his clothes hanging loosely on his skeletal frame, his once solid build now gaunt. A constant tremor ran through his hands, making it difficult to hold a pen steady, to even lift a cup of coffee without spilling it, his control slipping away. He was perpetually on edge, jumpy at every sound, every flicker of light, his nerves stretched to breaking point, a taut wire about to snap. He survived on adrenaline and the desperate need to find answers, pushing himself beyond all limits. Frank finally confronted him, his face a mask of concern and frustration, his usual gruffness replaced by a genuine fear for Ethan's well-being. He had seen enough of Ethan's decline to know something was seriously wrong. "Ethan, you're a mess. You're scaring the staff, and frankly, you're scaring me. You're talking to yourself, muttering about ghosts and fires. I'm putting you on leave." "Indefinite. You need to get some rest, see a doctor. A real one. Before you completely break down." Ethan tried to explain, tried to articulate the chilling reality of what he was experiencing, to convey the impossible truth, but the words sounded hollow, insane, even to his own ears. He saw the pity and disbelief in Frank's eyes, the way his station manager avoided his gaze, unable to meet his desperate stare. He considered confiding in someone else, perhaps the local historian he met during his research, a quiet, scholarly woman named Mrs. Albright, who seemed to possess a deeper understanding of Havenwood's hidden past, or a retired police officer he knew casually, Detective Miller, a man who had seen enough of the dark side of humanity to perhaps believe him. But the fear of being institutionalized, of being dismissed as a lunatic, held him back, a powerful deterrent. He felt increasingly alone in his investigation, a solitary figure battling a ghost and a town's deeply buried secrets, isolated in his terrifying reality. The world felt like it was closing in, a suffocating embrace, and the only voice he could trust, the only one that seemed to make sense, was the one that came through the static. He was losing his grip, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when Lily was so close to revealing everything, not when her desperate pleas echoed so clearly in his mind. Chapter 7: The Child's Secret. The last message from Lily had been urgent, almost frantic, a desperate, final plea that resonated with a chilling clarity. It had cut through the static with a precision that left no room for doubt, a voice no longer distorted but imbued with a chilling purpose. "Look under the old oak, behind the loose brick, the truth, they hid it, in the fireplace. Hurry, Ethan, he's coming for it, he'll burn it all again." Ethan, trembling with exhaustion and a desperate, burning resolve, knew he had to return to Blackwood Manor. The sun had yet to rise, the sky a bruised purple, promising more rain, a fitting backdrop for the grim task ahead. He drove through the deserted streets, his car tires hissing on the wet asphalt, the silence of the early hour broken only by the rhythmic thump of his windshield wipers, a steady beat against the growing dread in his chest. The ruins of the manor loomed, skeletal and desolate, a monument to a forgotten tragedy, its charred timbers reaching like accusing fingers towards the sky, silhouetted against the pre-dawn gloom. He spent hours searching, his hands raw and aching from digging in the cold, damp earth. He circled the largest, gnarliest oak tree near the ruins, its ancient branches twisted like arthritic fingers, its roots like gnarled veins pushing through the soil. He dug around its base, scraped away decades of fallen leaves and soil, but found nothing but cold, hard earth, a frustrating emptiness. Despair began to creep in, a cold, insidious tendril, whispering doubts in his mind. Had he misinterpreted the message? Was he truly losing his mind, chasing after phantom clues, succumbing to the pressure? Then, he remembered the crumbling fireplace, a blackened maw in the center of the ruins, a gaping wound in the heart of the house, where warmth once resided. He noticed a section of loose bricks during his previous visit, a subtle anomaly in the otherwise uniform decay, a detail that had nagged at him. He moved towards it, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. He ran his hand over the cold, rough stone, feeling for any give, any subtle shift, his fingers tracing the contours of the old masonry. And there it was. A single brick, slightly dislodged, hidden beneath a thick layer of soot and clinging ivy, almost perfectly camouflaged, as if nature itself conspired to keep the secret. With a grunt, he pried it loose, his fingers scraping against the rough mortar, the sound echoing in the stillness. Behind it, nestled in a small, hollowed-out space, was a small, wooden box. It was old, warped by moisture and the heat of the fire, its surface charred in places, but surprisingly intact, its surface smooth beneath his trembling fingers. He pulled it out, his fingers fumbling with the rusted clasp, his breath held tight in his chest, a profound sense of anticipation building within him. Inside, wrapped in a faded, water-stained piece of cloth, was a small, leather-bound journal. It was weathered and partially burnt along one edge, its pages slightly brittle, but remarkably preserved, the ink still legible. He recognized the childish handwriting instantly, a familiar scrawl from the old-school records he'd found, a direct link to the past. Lily Blackwood. He sat down on a fallen timber, oblivious to the cold and the damp, the persistent drizzle that plastered his hair to his face, mingling with what might have been tears. He opened the journal, and began to read. The words, once just ink on paper, came alive, a chilling narrative unfolding before his eyes, a voice from the grave speaking directly to him. The journal was Lily's diary, filled with childish drawings of flowers and stick figures, interspersed with increasingly frantic entries. It detailed the mundane joys of her young life, playing hide-and-seek with her older brother Thomas in the sprawling gardens. Her mother, Eleanor, reading her stories by the grand fireplace, her voice soft and comforting. Her father, Elias, teaching her to ride a pony in the sprawling fields behind the manor, a symbol of their idyllic life. But then, the tone shifted, subtly at first, then with a growing sense of dread. Entries spoke of hushed arguments between her parents, growing louder, more frequent, their voices carrying through the thin walls. Her mother's increasing sadness, her eyes often red-rimmed, her laughter replaced by quiet sighs. And the frequent, intimidating visits of Uncle Silas, a presence that filled the house with an unspoken tension, a coldness that seeped into every room. Lily described seeing Silas and her father arguing fiercely over papers and money, the words bankruptcy and ruin echoing from behind closed doors, a specter haunting their prosperity. She drew pictures of her mother crying, huddled in a corner, and her father looking angry and defeated, his shoulders slumped, his spirit broken. The entries leading up to October 27th were chilling, a countdown to disaster, each word a step closer to the inferno. Lily wrote about a big party her parents were hosting, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to impress investors and save her father's failing business, a fragile facade of prosperity. She noted how Uncle Silas was there, lurking in the shadows, his eyes always watching, a predatory gleam in them, observing every interaction. She even drew a small, crude picture of him, his face a dark, menacing scribble, a child's innocent depiction of evil. Then came the entry for October 27th, written in a shaky, terrified hand, the words almost illegible in places, smeared as if by tears or a drop of water. This was the dark truth, laid bare, a testament to a horrific crime. The party was loud. Too loud. Mommy was sad. Daddy was yelling at Uncle Silas in the study. I went to hide in my secret place, behind the big bookcase. I heard them. Uncle Silas and Daddy. Uncle Silas said Daddy had to do it. He said it was the only way. He said if Daddy didn't, they would lose everything. Daddy said no, not the house, not us, not my family. He begged him. Uncle Silas said he had no choice. He said if the house burned, the debts would go away, and the insurance money would save them. He said no one would know. Daddy looked so scared, like a trapped animal, desperate and cornered. Then Uncle Silas took a can. It smelled funny, like gasoline, and he poured it everywhere, all over the curtains and the floor. Daddy tried to stop him, but Uncle Silas pushed him hard, and Daddy hit his head on the desk. Then, a spark. A big fire. It was so fast. Daddy screamed. Uncle Silas ran out. He didn't even look back, he just left us. I tried to get out, but the door was locked. He locked it from the outside. I heard Mommy screaming from downstairs, her voice full of terror. The smoke, it's everywhere. I can't breathe. Uncle Silas, he did it. He locked me in. He wanted us all gone. He looked at me through the smoke, right through the glass. He knows I saw him. He's coming back. He's coming to get me. Please, help, please. The entry ended abruptly, the last words trailing off into a desperate, silent plea, a final testament to her terror. Ethan stared at the words, horrified, a cold wave of nausea washing over him, making him dizzy. It wasn't an accident. It was arson. And murder. Elias Blackwood hadn't just been a victim. He had been forced into a terrible choice, then brutally betrayed, his life taken by the very man he was trying to save his family from. And Lily, a terrified child, had witnessed it all, only to be deliberately trapped inside by her own uncle, Silas Thorne, to cover up a financial crime and ensure no witnesses remained. The betrayal was not just financial. It was a monstrous betrayal of trust, of family, of innocence, a crime so heinous it defied comprehension, a pure act of evil. The weight of the truth, combined with the supernatural strain he'd endured, pushed Ethan to his breaking point. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, a burning need for justice that transcended his own exhaustion and fear. Lily's pleas, her fragmented messages, her lingering presence, it all made agonizing, heartbreaking sense now. He had to expose Silas Thorne. He had to free Lily, truly free her, by bringing her tormentor to justice, no matter the cost. Chapter 8: Crossing the Frequencies. The journal was a physical anchor, grounding the terrifying reality of Lily's story in Ethan's hands, its brittle pages a testament to a truth long buried. But its contents had also shattered the last vestiges of his own reality. The past and present no longer simply blurred. They collided, violently, within him, creating a chaotic symphony of spectral whispers and vivid, agonizing memories, a constant assault on his senses. Lily's ghost, once a fleeting shadow or a distorted voice, now appeared to him with chilling clarity, her form growing more defined, more substantial, almost solid. She was translucent, ethereal, yet undeniably present, her small, mournful figure a constant companion, a silent witness to his every move. She would appear in his apartment, a silent observer watching him as he reread the journal entries, her eyes wide with a sorrow that mirrored his own, a silent plea for vengeance that resonated deep within him. In the radio booth, she would stand beside him, a faint, cold presence, sometimes gesturing towards a specific newspaper clipping, or a name in his research, guiding him with an almost imperceptible nod, her translucent fingers pointing to the damning evidence, leading him closer to the truth. He wasn't just hearing her anymore, he was seeing her, a constant, spectral companion, a silent partner in his desperate quest for justice, bound by a shared purpose. He began to experience vivid flashbacks that felt indistinguishable from his own memories, yet he knew they were Lily's. He saw the grand Blackwood Manor before the fire, alive with laughter and light, filled with the sounds of a happy family, then the growing tension, the hushed arguments that escalated into shouting matches, the unraveling of a perfect life. He felt the fear in the study as Silas poured the accelerant, the sickening smell of gasoline filling his nostrils, saw the flicker of the match, felt the searing heat as the flames erupted, consuming everything in their path, devouring the world he knew. He saw Elias's desperate, futile struggle against Silas, then his horrified realization as his daughter, Lily, was trapped, her small face pressed against the glass of the locked door, her eyes wide with terror. These were not just images. They were visceral sensations searing themselves into his mind, blurring the line between his own identity and Lily's tragic past, making him a living conduit for her suffering, a vessel for her memories. His radio show, Night Owls, became a conduit for the haunting in a way he couldn't control, a public stage for the spectral drama. Callers would report strange sounds bleeding into the broadcast, faint, childish whimpers, the crackle of distant flames, or even Lily's voice, clear and unbidden, cutting through his own words, narrating fragments of her final moments, her story echoing across the airwaves. Some listeners, particularly the more sensitive or superstitious, called in to report seeing shadowy figures in their own homes while listening to his show, or feeling a sudden, inexplicable chill, as if the haunting had spread beyond the airwaves, infecting their own realities, drawing them into the mystery. The station, once a quiet refuge, felt like a beacon for the supernatural, drawing in the lost and the tormented, a stage for Lily's final, desperate performance, a broadcast from beyond the grave. This collision of realities forced Ethan to confront his own demons, a past trauma that had long festered beneath his cynical exterior, a wound he had tried to bury beneath layers of detachment and professional cynicism. He had a younger sister, Sarah, who had died tragically in a house fire when he was a teenager. He had been out with friends, sneaking a cigarette behind the old diner, when the fire started. He'd arrived home to find the house engulfed, the sirens wailing, and his parents hysterical, their faces streaked with soot and tears, their grief a raw, open wound. He'd always carried the crushing guilt that he wasn't there, that he failed to protect her, that he was responsible for her death, a burden that had weighed on him for decades. The Blackwood case, Lily's desperate entrapment, mirrored his own unresolved guilt, his own agonizing inability to save someone he loved from the flames, a second chance at redemption. He realized that by helping Lily, he wasn't just seeking justice for a forgotten ghost. He was seeking redemption for his own past, a chance to finally lay his own demons to rest, to find peace for himself. This personal connection made his quest deeply, agonizingly personal, intertwining his fate with Lily's, making her fight his own. He was no longer a detached investigator. He was a man haunted by two fires, two lost children, and a desperate, burning need to make things right, to finally bring peace to the tormented, both living and dead. This realization brought with it a profound moral dilemma, a heavy burden on his conscience. Silas Thorne, according to his meticulous research, was now a seemingly respected, if reclusive, member of the community, living under a different name in a quiet, affluent suburb on the other side of Havenwood, his past carefully concealed, his crimes buried beneath a veneer of respectability. Exposing him would mean destroying lives, shattering reputations, and risking everything Ethan had left, his job, his sanity, perhaps even his life. But what was the alternative? To let Lily's torment continue? To allow a cold-blooded murderer to walk free, to live a life of comfort while Lily remained trapped in the ashes of her past, screaming unheard? Driven by Lily's silent, pleading presence and his own burning need for atonement, Ethan began to gather evidence to expose Silas. He meticulously cross-referenced the journal's details with old financial records he'd found in forgotten county archives, property transfers that showed Silas's sudden acquisition of assets after the fire, and obscure legal documents that hinted at a long-standing scheme, a web of deceit. He knew he had to be careful. Silas Thorne was a dangerous man, capable of monstrous acts, a man who had already proven he would stop at nothing to protect his secrets, even murder. And Ethan, now fully immersed in the spectral world, knew he was being watched, not just by Lily, but by something far more sinister. The shadows that had once been indistinct now seemed to coalesce, to take on a more menacing form, a silent guardian of Silas Thorne's dark secret, a lurking threat that followed Ethan wherever he went, a constant reminder of the danger he was in. Chapter 9: Static's Last Call. The final message from Lily came through the radio with an unnerving, crystalline clarity, cutting through the usual static like a knife, sharp and precise. It wasn't a plea for help anymore, but a specific, urgent instruction, imbued with a desperate finality, a last, desperate push towards justice, a final act of guidance. He keeps it, where the old tracks meet the river, the truth, in the dark, in the old mill, the ledger. Hurry, Ethan. He knows, he's coming for you, he'll try to stop you. Ethan clutched the receiver, his knuckles white, his hand trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, his heart pounding in his chest. He knows. The warning echoed in his mind, a chilling pronouncement. Silas Thorne. He was close. Lily was guiding him to the final piece of the puzzle, and to the man who had condemned her, the man who now knew Ethan was coming, a confrontation that felt inevitable. The location Lily described was a forgotten part of Havenwood, an abandoned industrial district that time had left behind, a skeleton of its former self. Rusted train tracks, overgrown with tenacious weeds, met the sluggish, polluted river, its surface slick with iridescent oil, reflecting the gray, ominous sky. It was a place of decay and shadows, perfect for hiding secrets, a monument to forgotten industry and buried crimes, a place where darkness thrived. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his old, worn trench coat, the journal tucked securely inside its inner pocket, its pages a silent testament to the truth, and left the station, leaving Frank a terse, unconvincing note about a personal emergency, and a vague promise to call, knowing he might not return. The drive was tense, his senses heightened, every nerve screaming with anticipation. Every shadow seemed to move, every distant sound a potential threat, a whisper of unseen eyes, a lurking danger. He felt Lily's presence beside him in the car, a cold spot on the passenger seat, a faint, encouraging hum in the silence, a spectral hand guiding him through the labyrinthine streets, a silent promise of support. He found the place Lily described, an old, derelict mill, its brickwork crumbling, its windows shattered like vacant eyes, staring out at the desolate landscape. The corrugated iron walls were rusted and peeling, the roof partially collapsed, exposing the skeletal framework to the elements. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, stagnant water, and something else, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood and forgotten machinery, a scent of decay and violence. He pushed open a creaking, protesting door, the sound echoing ominously through the vast, empty space, a chilling welcome. Inside, the mill was cavernous, filled with the ghosts of forgotten machinery, silent looms and broken gears, rusted and still, and the oppressive weight of silence. Dust motes danced in the sparse, ethereal beams of moonlight filtering through the broken roof, illuminating swirling motes of dust that looked like tiny, dancing spirits, a macabre ballet. And then he saw him. Silas Thorne. Older, grayer, his face etched with lines of worry and suspicion, but unmistakably the man from the faded photographs, the architect of Lily's torment, his features now clearly visible in the dim light. He was sitting at a makeshift table, cobbled together from old crates, surrounded by stacks of old ledgers and documents, his face illuminated by a single, bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe around him. He looked up, his eyes cold and devoid of surprise, a chilling recognition in their depths, a predatory gleam. He had been waiting. "Took you long enough, Mr. Thorne," Silas said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, a chilling calm that belied the tension in the air. "Though I suppose a ghost can be rather inefficient with directions, wouldn't you agree? Especially one so persistent." The chilling confrontation had begun. The air crackled with unspoken threats, a palpable tension that made it hard to breathe. Ethan felt Lily's presence surge, a cold wave washing over him, a surge of spectral energy that seemed to empower him. He held up the journal, its burnt edges a stark contrast to the incriminating words within, a silent accusation. "Lily told me everything, Silas. It wasn't an accident, was it? You burned that house down. You murdered them. You murdered her. For money. For a clean slate." Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against Ethan's nerves, a sound of pure contempt. "Murder? A strong word, Mr. Thorne. A necessary inconvenience. Elias was ruined. He was going to drag us all down into the abyss, destroy everything I had built. The fire, it was a clean slate. A fresh start. A way to escape the debts, to secure my future. And the girl, she saw too much. A loose end. A regrettable necessity." His eyes, devoid of remorse, fixed on Ethan, a predatory gleam in their depths. "Just like you, Mr. Thorne. Another loose end that needs to be tied up." The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable tension, a suffocating weight that pressed down on Ethan. Silas stood slowly, deliberately, his movements precise and menacing, like a coiled snake. He reached under the table, his hand emerging with a heavy, rusted wrench, its metal glinting ominously in the dim light, a crude weapon. "You should have listened to the town folk, Mr. Thorne. Some things are best left buried. Some secrets are meant to stay in the dark. And some people, they don't know when to quit." Ethan braced himself, his heart pounding against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and defiance. He was alone, outmatched, facing a cold-blooded killer. But a fierce resolve burned within him, a fire ignited by Lily's suffering, by his own past. He wasn't just fighting for Lily anymore. He was fighting for every truth that had been buried, every voice that had been silenced, every injustice that had been swept under the rug. He would not let Silas win. As Silas lunged, the wrench arcing towards Ethan's head with brutal speed, a sudden, piercing shriek filled the warehouse, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of reality. It wasn't Lily's usual mournful cry. This was a scream of pure, unleashed fury, a torrent of pent-up rage, a sound that made Silas recoil. The single light bulb above them exploded with a deafening pop, plunging the warehouse into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint moonlight filtering through the broken roof and the flashing red and blue lights now visible through the broken windows, growing brighter. In the brief, blinding flash of the explosion, Ethan saw it, Lily's ghost, no longer translucent, but a swirling vortex of white light and spectral energy, a furious, vengeful entity, directly confronting Silas. Her small, spectral hand was outstretched, pointing at him, her face contorted in an expression of pure, unadulterated rage, her eyes burning with an otherworldly fire, a silent accusation. Silas stumbled back, a guttural cry escaping his lips, his face contorted in sheer terror, his eyes wide with a primal fear, his composure shattered. He saw her. He finally saw her, the ghost of the child he had murdered, come back to haunt him. The wrench clattered to the floor, a metallic clang echoing in the sudden silence. "No! Get away from me! You're dead! You're supposed to be dead!" he shrieked, backing away, tripping over himself. In that crucial moment of Silas's terror and distraction, Ethan saw his chance. He lunged forward, not at Silas, but at the table. He grabbed a stack of documents, old financial ledgers detailing Silas's fraudulent schemes, a signed confession from Elias Blackwood detailing Silas's coercion, and a final, damning will that explicitly disinherited Silas, proving his motive and his crime. The evidence. All of it. The truth, finally in his hands. The sound of sirens pierced the night, growing louder, closer, a symphony of justice arriving. Ethan had made a desperate, anonymous call to the police before leaving the station, giving them a vague tip about suspicious activity in the abandoned warehouse, a hunch that had paid off, a desperate gamble that had worked. He hadn't expected them to arrive so quickly, but the universe, it seemed, was finally on Lily's side, orchestrating her final act of vengeance, her last call for justice. Silas, his face ashen, his body trembling, turned to flee, scrambling towards a back exit, but it was too late. The warehouse doors burst open, revealing the flashing blue and red lights of police cruisers, their beams cutting through the darkness, illuminating the scene. As the officers swarmed in, apprehending a terrified and raving Silas, who was still screaming about the ghost, about Lily, about the fire, Ethan looked back at the spot where Lily's ghost had been. She was fading, becoming translucent again, a soft, peaceful glow emanating from her form, like a dying ember. She looked at Ethan, a faint, ethereal smile gracing her lips, a silent nod of profound gratitude, her eyes filled with a peace he had never seen before, a soul finally at rest. Then, she was gone, dissolving into the moonlight, finally free, her torment ended, her purpose fulfilled. Justice had been served. And a soul, trapped for 3 decades, had finally found its rest, guided by the voice on the radio. Chapter 10: The Silent Broadcast. The town of Havenwood reeled from the revelation. The arrest of Silas Thorne, a seemingly innocuous, reclusive figure who had walked among them for decades, his crimes hidden in plain sight, and the subsequent publicizing of Lily Blackwood's journal, shattered decades of carefully constructed illusions. The tragic accident of Blackwood Manor, a story woven into the very fabric of the town's history, a comforting lie, was now revealed as a calculated act of arson and murder, a brutal betrayal driven by cold, ruthless greed. The news spread like wildfire, consuming the quiet calm of Havenwood, replacing it with shock, anger, and a pervasive sense of unease, a collective realization that their past was far darker than they had ever imagined, teeming with hidden horrors. Ethan Thorne, the cynical late-night radio host, was suddenly a local hero, a reluctant figure thrust into the spotlight, his anonymity shattered. His face, once obscured by the shadows of the sound booth, was plastered across local newspapers, his story a sensational headline, a tale of a man who listened to ghosts. His show, Night Owls, experienced an unprecedented surge in popularity. People called in not just with their lonely thoughts, but with their own half-forgotten stories, their own suspicions about other cold cases, their own whispers of long-buried truths, inspired by Ethan's courage. The airwaves, once a solitary space, now buzzed with a collective awakening, a town finally ready to confront its hidden darkness, to air its dirty laundry. But Ethan was profoundly changed. The victory felt hollow, tinged with a deep, pervasive weariness that settled into his bones like a chronic ache, a phantom pain. The constant supernatural contact, the vivid nightmares, the terrifying collision of past and present, it had taken a toll that no amount of sleep could fix, no amount of success could erase, leaving him irrevocably altered. He was no longer the detached cynic, the man who had sought refuge in the predictable rhythm of the night, safe from the chaos of the world. The world, once a predictable, mundane place, was now layered with unseen dimensions, unheard voices, and the lingering echoes of suffering, a constant reminder of the veil he had pierced, a world far more complex and terrifying than he had ever imagined. He sat in the sound booth for what he knew would be his final, Night Owls, broadcast. The static was gone. The airwaves were clear, almost eerily so, a profound silence where the ghostly whispers once resided, now replaced by a quiet emptiness. The old equipment hummed with a quiet, almost reverent, silence, as if acknowledging the profound shift that had occurred, the end of a long, dark chapter. He leaned into the microphone, his voice different. It was no longer world-weary, but imbued with a quiet solemnity, a profound understanding that had been forged in fire and shadow, a wisdom born of confronting the impossible, of facing down his own fears. He didn't explicitly talk about ghosts, about Lily, or about the specifics of the Blackwood case. He didn't need to. The town knew. They had heard the truth, loud and clear, echoing in their own minds. "Good evening, Night Owls," he began, his voice a low, resonant hum, carrying a new weight, a new depth, a newfound purpose. "Tonight we talk about truth, about the weight of the past, and the importance of listening. Not just to the voices you hear on the radio, but to the ones you don't. The whispers in the dark, the stories buried beneath silence, the cries of those who were never heard, those who were forgotten. Sometimes, the most important messages aren't broadcast on any frequency you can dial in. They're carried on the wind, in the echoes of old houses, in the quiet corners of our own hearts, waiting for someone to finally pay attention, to truly listen." He spoke about the courage it took to face uncomfortable truths, about the liberation that came with acknowledging the past, no matter how painful, how ugly, how deeply buried. He spoke about the power of empathy, of reaching out to those who were lost, those who were trapped, those who simply needed someone to listen, to validate their existence, their suffering, to bring them peace. He spoke of the echoes that linger, and the peace that comes when those echoes are finally acknowledged, when justice is finally served. He dedicated a final, haunting piece of music, a melancholic piano solo he never played before, a melody that seemed to speak of both profound sorrow and ultimate release, a bittersweet farewell to those who were lost, and those who finally found their way home. He imagined Lily, finally at peace, her spirit light and free, drifting away from the ruins of her past, towards a brighter, quieter shore, unburdened by the weight of injustice, her torment finally over. When the music faded, leaving a lingering resonance in the air, a quiet hum that filled the booth, he simply said, his voice soft but firm, "This has been Night Owls. Thank you for listening. And remember, listen closely. Because sometimes the silence speaks the loudest truth." He clicked off the microphone, the red on air light extinguishing with a soft, final click, marking the end of an era, the end of his time on the air. He left the radio station that night, not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet, profound sense of completion. He didn't know where he was going, or what he would do next. He might never return to the airwaves, his voice silenced by the very truths he had uncovered, his purpose fulfilled. He was no longer the detached cynic, the man who had sought refuge in the predictable rhythm of the night, safe from the chaos of the world. He carried the weight of what he had experienced, the chilling knowledge of the unseen world, but also a newfound purpose, a deeper understanding of human suffering and the enduring power of truth. The ending was bittersweet. Lily was free, her spirit finally at rest, her cries silenced by justice. But Ethan was marked by the encounter, irrevocably changed, a different man. He might occasionally feel a lingering chill, a phantom touch on his arm, or hear a faint whisper of static in the quiet moments of his life. But it was no longer a desperate plea for help, but a quiet echo, a gentle reminder of the soul he had freed, and the man he had become. He looked at the world with different eyes, understanding that some truths existed beyond the visible, beyond the tangible, and some voices, no matter how faint, needed only someone willing to listen. And he, Ethan Thorne, had finally learned how to truly hear, to truly see, and to truly live, carrying the echoes of the past into a new, uncertain future. And so, the silence falls. We hope you were captivated by the haunting echoes of Frequency 91.2 and Ethan Thorne's journey into the shadows. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more tales from the dark corners of the night. Until next time, remember to listen closely, for you never know what truths the static might reveal.